Welcome everybody to the summer reception of Brussels Report and the Tholos Foundation. We've had many Brussels Liberty Networks, and we're more than happy to finish off the year with this wonderful reception in the presence of Ambassador Puzder. Very welcome, Mr. Ambassador. First, I'd like to give the words to Lorenzo Montanari, who's the International Director of Tholos.
Thank you, Peter. Welcome, everyone. Good evening or good afternoon, depending on your time. I'm Lorenzo Montanari, Vice President for the Tholos Foundation Americans for Tax Reform. Welcome, and thank you so much, Peter Clef, for our long-standing partnership here in Brussels and for organizing this reception. We are really delighted to welcome our special guest, Ambassador Andrew Puzder, U.S. Ambassador to the Union. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your leadership in strengthening the relationship between the United States and Europe. Tholos Foundation, as well as Americans for Tax Reform, was founded in 1985 at the request of Ronald Reagan to promote tax reform in the U.S. And with Tholos Foundation, we are promoting a fiscal conservative idea, intellectual property rights, free market idea in the international level. We have founded a network of 140 think tanks all over the world. So we have been working, as well as like with Peter and other think tanks here in Brussels, to promote free market idea. In the last years, we have been publishing several international indexes, one on intellectual property right and one on trade. And recently in Brussels, almost 1 year ago, we founded an innovation working group within the European Parliament with the same idea to strengthen the relationship between the United States and the European Union, and especially working with members of the European Parliament to promote free market idea, intellectual property right, and innovation. So thank you again for joining our summer reception, and I give the floor back to Peter.
Thank you very much, Lorenzo. Welcome, Mr. Ambassador. So you've been ambassador here in Brussels since 11 September. So how do you like the city?
Well, first of all, thank you, Lorenzo, and thank you, Peter, for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be here. Always fun to be with a group of people that are gathering to show their respect and appreciation for freedom and liberty. And this is that group. So thank you very much. I love Brussels. The people are wonderful. The president told me I'd love this job. It took some convincing. He said, "I want you to be the ambassador to the European Union," and that was not what I expected him to say. And I remember thinking, "There's an ambassador to the European Union." Exactly. He spent about 10 minutes. "Oh, you're going to love this job. It's a great, perfect job." Anyway, by the end of 10 minutes, he'll have you convinced just to do about anything. And he was right. I do love this job. To his credit, this is a wonderful job for me. People have been great. The city, I love the antiquities. There's near where we live, there's woods where they're just beautiful woods with paths, and you can walk forever. And the weather is good about 10% of the time. But no, it's been wonderful. I love Brussels.
Well, happy to hear that. Let's get straight into it. The Turnberry trade agreement goes between Ursula von der Leyen and President Trump. So last summer, it foresaw that the maximum tariff for EU goods going to the US is in many cases only 15%. And in return, US goods mostly enjoy 0% tariffs. Now, in Europe, obviously, many people have been calling for that to be, further reduced, perhaps also to zero. Would there be scope to do that? And perhaps would it be possible in return for a reduction in the non-tariff barriers that the EU is imposing on American goods?
Well, that's a good. How long do I have to answer these questions? This is look. The Turnberry Agreement came about because of a severe imbalance in a relationship. Our largest trade deficit in the world is with the European Union. Now, it's also our largest trade relationship, but it's the largest trade deficit. That's really not, that's as much the fault of the United States as it is the fault of Europe. The United States, after World War II, was really the only industrializing country country, the only first world country that had its industrial capacity and its agricultural capacity not blown to smithereens. I mean, we were the world power at that point in time, and it was important to us that the rest of the world recovered, that Japan recovered, that Germany recovered, that Europe recovered. And over the decades that followed, Europe did recover. And with the Cold War, it was important for us to have troops in Europe and to make sure that there would be a defense against the Soviets just overwhelming Europe. The need for that came to an end with the fall of the Berlin Wall. And the need for that imbalance in the trade relationship ended even before that. Nonetheless, the United States continued to do what it had been doing, which was provide defense and provide very favorable trade benefits to Europe. For example, for decades, up until the Turnberry Agreement, if you bought a Mercedes, if you were going to sell a Mercedes-Benz in Detroit, Michigan, you paid a 2.5% tariff. If you were going to sell a Ford or a Cadillac, let's say, in Berlin, you paid a 10% tariff, which is why there aren't lots of Mercedes in Detroit and no Cadillacs in Berlin. So that relationship had to change. Both President von der Leyen and President Trump recognized that it needed to be rebalanced, that trade deficit needs to be reduced. And the point of the tariffs are to rebalance that trade relationship. At some point, could that change? Sure. At some point, if the trade relationship becomes more balanced, we can always take another look at the trade relationship. That's going to take a period of time, but that can happen. On the non-tariff trade barriers, for those of you who followed the trade negotiations, for me, this was my life for like 10 months. I've been told by Manfred Weber and President Metsola at the Parliament that I've met with more members of Parliament than any other U.S. ambassador. And that's because for the last 10 months, I've been trying to get Parliament to pass the trade deal. That was, the Commission approved it, von der Leyen entered into it, the Council approved it very quickly, and that left us with the Parliament, which was a long process. And not only because things take a long time in the EU, but we had the kerfuffle over Greenland, we had the Supreme Court cutting back on President Trump's ability to impose tariffs, we had the military action in Iran. There were a lot of things that were sort of bumps in the road to get to the point where we got the tariffs reduced, where the Parliament approved the deal. I remember it started out in January where I found Bert Lange, who became a pretty good friend. He's the chairman of the Trade Commission, the Trade Committee in the Parliament, and he's a socialist. I told him, even though he's a socialist, I really like him. We worked very hard to get this done, and it wasn't easy to do with all the bumps in the road as we went through this process, because there was a lot of politics involved in this. But finally, we got it through, and I have to say it's a credit to the European Union that they were able to do this. People say it took a long time, my friends in the United States, and I point out that if President Trump came back with a deal that said, we're going to pay 15% tariff on European goods, they're going to pay 0% tariff selling goods in the United States, and it had to pass the House and the Senate in the United States, it never would have happened, would not have happened. So that was a 10-month journey. It was arduous, but we got it done. That, however, was the easy part of the trade deal. The tough part of the trade deal are what's called the non-tariff trade barriers. And those are all the regulatory requirements that the European Union has imposed on businesses, both in Europe and American businesses, U.S. businesses doing business in Europe. So this would include things like the deforestation regulation, the methane regulation, the corporate sustainability due diligence directive, the corporate sustainability reporting directive. This is the digital marketing act, I could go on like for 10 minutes just listing all of the acts that over the past 5 years have been passed by the European legislature, introduced by the Commission and passed by the legislature, which, by the way, are devastating the economy here in Europe. They're just devastating European economies. It's you had an economy that was built on what seemed like pretty sound, let's say 3 legs of a stool, pretty sound stool. One leg of the stool was that you would have Russian energy cheap forever. President Trump warned in his first term that Europe wouldn't, but Europe assumed that it would. They laughed at it. The Germans laughed at it. Secondly, that China would be a great market for European retail goods like forever, because there's so many people in China. They'd be this great market. And the third leg was that the United States would cover the defense costs for Europe in perpetuity, because that's what America does. Well, between 2022 and 2025, that all collapsed. On top of that stool, you built this huge welfare system. And this regulatory leviathan, this maze of regulations that businesses had to satisfy to succeed. Now, with those three stools in place, businesses could still succeed. And they could pay the taxes that covered the cost of that welfare system. Well, then all of a sudden, all the legs of the stool collapsed. The welfare system is still there, and Europe is now committed to 5% of GDP to cover defense costs, which everybody in Europe admits President Trump encouraged, if he didn't aggressively encourage. But it was the right thing to do. Europe really does need to defend itself. The United States needs to focus on China. We need to focus in the Pacific. That's where the Soviet Union of the current age is now China, where we really need to focus our energies. And while we have a larger Navy than China, we don't have a larger Navy than China. If part of it's in China, outside of China, part of it's in the Middle East, part of it's in the northern Atlantic, part of it's in South America. We've got to consolidate what we're doing. So Europe needs to defend itself, and it needs to come up with that 5% of GDP to cover defense costs. Well, how do you do that now that the legs collapsed on the stool? You got this huge social welfare system, and now you got to pay 5% to cover defense costs. Well, that's not easy to do. There are two things you could do. One is you could reduce the social welfare system, and you all know how much political support there is for that. So that's not going to happen. Just take that off the list. The only other option is economic growth. And you can't have economic growth with this regulatory maze that Europe has imposed on itself. There's I can't remember his name, the CEO of Mistral, the French AI company, smart young guy. I haven't met him, but I follow him on X. But he was saying that if you're a startup in Europe, and then he's talking about AI, you can get to here, and then you bump into a wall. The wall is you need an army of attorneys to get to here. Well, you need an army of attorneys because of the regulatory barriers. So what do those companies do? Well, they leave Europe. They go to the United States. Companies that have been established in Europe for decades, some of them for a couple centuries, are now opening new businesses and moving to China, where they can manufacture with cheap energy, which the regulatory maze has just massively increased the cost of energy. There's no regulatory environmental requirements. There's cheap labor. They've got illegal Russian oil coming in. So they're moving to China, where they can manufacture their goods and be competitive on the world stage, which is devastating Europe's economy. You may be aware of this, you may not, because I say it a lot, so if you heard me speak before, you probably heard me say this. But GDP per capita, so annual economic growth per person in Europe, in Germany, is lower than it is in the state of West Virginia in the United States, which is the 49th worst state out of 50. If Germany were an American state, it would be the 50th lowest GDP per capita. That's the economic manufacturing powerhouse of Germany, of Europe. France, the other economies, France, Italy, Spain, I'll throw the UK in, the average for the EU overall, GDP per capita is lower than it is in the state of Mississippi, which is the 50th worst state in GDP per capita in America. So that France, if it were a member of a state in the United States, would rank 52nd or 53rd below every other American state. This is because of the regulatory maze, the impact it has on labor, the impact it has on energy costs, the impact it has on businesses being able to function in a way that makes any kind of economic sense. So these regulatory requirements that are crippling Europe are the non-tariff trade barriers that also damage American businesses that are trying to do business in Europe. And so we're now going to try and reduce those, eliminate their impact, do what we can to try and make it easier for businesses, particularly U.S. businesses, to function here, but that will also be beneficial to the EU. I can't think of one thing we're advocating at the U.S. mission that Europe wouldn't be better off itself if it adopted. Now, I'm not here to argue for things that make Europe better off. My job is to make sure we implement the president's policies, the administration's policies. But I think virtually across the board, everything we advocate would be better for Europe. So that's the answer on the non-tariff trade barriers. And I did ask how long I had.
Well, yeah, and very important point to stress how these are also damaging European consumers. And you could argue the same is true for the substantial fines that the European Commission and the EU has imposed on mostly American big tech companies. So what are your thoughts on that, and specifically, what are the impacts on the transatlantic economic relations?
So the companies we're talking about are tech companies, and these are the tech companies that are advancing what I'll call the AI economy, but you might as well just call it the economy because AI becomes superfluous after a while. AI economy is the economy. And if you want to be in the AI economy, if you want to participate meaningfully, and Europe should. I mean, 43% of the professors that teach AI courses in the United States are European. The president of Cyprus told me, when Cyprus took over the presidency last fall, I went and visited Cyprus. The president said, I just visited New York, I visited Silicon Valley, I visited Texas, and I visited all of the tech companies. And everybody I talked to was a European. These innovative companies that can't go higher because of the arm, they're they're AI companies. And they go to the United States where they can get funding, venture capital funding, and where they don't have the regulatory barriers holding them down. And if they're successful, they get to keep more of what they make. So it's important that Europe become a part of the AI economy, and Europe wants to be part. President von der Leyen wants it to be part, President Metsola, President Costa, everybody wants Europe to be in the AI economy. To do that, you need 5 things. First of all, you need energy, because you can't participate in the AI economy if you don't have energy. You can, just to use I keep using these levers with my hands, but to reindustrialize, and Europe also needs to reindustrialize. To reindustrialize, you say now you have this much energy. And can you run an industrial economy on wind and solar? Well, I think the UK and Germany have proven you can't do that. You have to have base power. And even President von der Leyen, speaking about 2 months ago at the Nuclear Energy Summit, said, we love wind, we love solar, they're great, but sometimes the wind don't blow and the sun don't shine. I'm paraphrasing her, but that's basically what she said. And you have to have base power, which is, it could be nuclear, but right now you don't have nuclear because many European countries decided that nuclear wasn't a good thing. Now I get that. There was Fukushima, and what happened there, and there was the event in Ukraine, where the Soviet Union almost killed everybody in Europe, Chernobyl. So I get that, but it's safer now. We're beyond that. And so you can put nuclear in, but it's going to take 15, 20 years before base power can be supplied by nuclear. So you need fossil fuels. And here in Europe, there were extensive regulations passed to make fossil fuels more expensive so that people would go to renewable energy. Well, it worked. You went to renewable energy and fossil fuels are more expensive. But now, we come to the realization that to reindustrialize, we're going to need LNG. We're going to need natural gas, pretty clean burning. It's abundant. The United States will sell you a bunch. But you have to, but you're paying so much more for it. I'm sorry?
Free gas.
You're paying a lot more for it than you have to because there's all of these regulations that do what? Well, they make it more expensive because that's what they were designed to do. So the first thing you're going to need to do is change policy so that you have enough energy to actually not only reindustrialize, which you should hear, but if you're going to be in the AI economy, you you're going to need energy up to here, which is why the United States and China are so aggressively using every tool they have to generate energy, to generate electricity. So first you need energy. Second, you need critical minerals. China controls them. We just entered into a critical minerals memorandum of understanding with Europe. We've got other countries that we have a memorandum of understanding or an agreement on critical minerals to try and ring fence our economies with respect to critical minerals so we can't be held hostage by the Chinese. We also have silica, which again will involve critical minerals and chips to try and deal with this critical minerals issue. The EU has now joined silica. So that's another three agreements where we've come together in the past 60 days. So you need critical minerals. We're working on that. So the other three things you need, Parent said you need 5 things: energy, critical minerals, you need data centers, you need data, and you need access to the US AI hardware stack. Now you could get access to the Chinese AI hardware stack. But if your choice is between the free market economy, partnering with the free market economy, or partnering with the totalitarian, communist, economically coercive group of mercantilists, I think the choice is pretty obvious. You want to team up with the free market economy. The companies that can bring you, that will build the data centers, that will invest the money to build the data centers, that will collect the data, and that will bring the US AI hardware stack to Europe, are those 7 or 8 large US tech companies. They want to do it. They beg to do it. So I'm getting to the answer to your question now. They want to do it. They sit across from me at the table at the embassy and say, Ambassador, can you help us? We love Europe. We've been doing business here 20, 30 years. It's a great market. We want to invest. We want to grow. We want to bring Europe with us. But every time we turn around, it's a new regulation, or they move the goalpost on an old regulation, or they hit us with $100 million fine. It's a little hard to do business in a place that's making it very obvious to you that they want you off the continent. So I think it's very, very important that we work with these tech companies, that Europe work with the tech companies. It's very important that that these fines stop. Now I realize they're imposed under antitrust law, and their excuse is, well, all of the American companies are all of the big companies, so they're the ones we need to fine because that'll help competitiveness and our companies will grow. The problem is the reason your companies didn't grow had nothing to do with Google or Amazon growing. They had to do with the regulatory barriers that prevent them from growing. So if you want European companies to grow, you need to do the things, you need to remove the things that are stopping them from growing. You don't need to make American companies grow less. That philosophy just makes both of us fail and none of us succeed, and the Chinese win the AI war. And if they win the AI war, we're done. They win culturally, economically, militarily. You know, you saw what happened with Mythos recently, where every bank in the world, every organization in the world was in a panic because now there was an AI program that could reach in and grab their secrets, grab their secret information. And that's finding holes in your cryptology. In other words, we've all got codes, right, that we use to access information. Mythos finds the holes. It goes into your system and finds the holes. Mythos can also fill the holes. So if you get Mythos, and obviously the United States got Mythos first, we should all be very grateful for that. Because if China got it first, we might not have any money in our bank accounts. But America got it first, and has given it to European countries. They can patch the holes. The problem is if you get to quantum AI, then cryptology is irrelevant. They'll just know your codes. Quantum AI does 25 years of thinking in 3 seconds, and they will decode everything immediately. So cryptology is not a defense. You have to have post-quantum cryptology security. America has that. These are the kinds of things we want to share, we can share, but we're going to have to stop punishing the companies that can do that.
Well, thank you for the great answer, and also thank you for linking this with energy, because as you mentioned, energy and cheap energy is of course also the basis to develop AI, and I think it's quite telling that we have American LNG producers having to tell Europe it's maybe not so smart if you already have a shortage of gas could drive up the price even more with this new regulation. But we have about 10 more minutes before the reception starts, and I would like to give the opportunity to the floor to ask a few questions to the ambassador. So please raise your hand if you want to ask a question. Please also introduce you and keep your answer below 1 minute, preferably. So
I'll try to keep my answer dead short.
Hi, thanks for that wonderful talk. I'm Jacob Reynolds from MCC Brussels. One area that we haven't touched on yet is what the Trump administration often calls, I think rightly, civilizational values. And it strikes me that you've outlined a lot of areas where progress has been very, very possible with the European Union and European governments. But to my mind, it seems that that message, the importance of the civilizational element that the Trump administration has been pushing, has actually, if anything, is going in the wrong direction. And the European leaders are very, very wary of this discourse. They find it hard to believe, and I think they suspect that it provides ammunition to their opponents domestically. What's your read on the state of play with regard to these civilizational questions?
But I think of the civilizational issues, we're really talking about two things: immigration and freedom of speech. I think, would you agree those are the two primary? Okay. So on immigration, look, I'd like to hear and tell you that Europe needs to do a lot more. Actually, Europe's doing a lot. You've reduced illegal immigration significantly, and you're continuing to reduce it. Asylum claims have been reduced significantly. Now that leaves the problem of there are a lot of people here who are here illegally or here and did not properly apply for asylum. And you've actually now passed a bill. I mean, there was a big celebration in the Senate. You can see in the Parliament. You can see the people on the right-hand side, cheering and saying all kind of things they got criticized for later. But you have made progress on immigration, and I think it's possible to do more. President Trump has shown that you can do more. But I think really compared to where you were 2 years ago, or even when I got here 10 months ago, you've made a lot of progress. On the freedom of speech issues, they're critical. But they're not EU issues. They're member state issues. In other words, in Germany, you can't deny the Holocaust. In the United States, you can't. Now, I got to tell you, I kind of get why you can't deny the Holocaust in Germany. That doesn't upset me. If you can't criticize politicians in Germany, the UK, or France, now that's a civilizational issue. If people can't say what they think about politics, that's something that needs to be addressed. And I don't think it is being addressed. Now, it's not an EU issue because unlike the United States where we have the First Amendment that covers the entire country, so you've got 50 states that really can't violate the First Amendment. You don't have a First Amendment. You don't have an overarching European rule that the member states have to abide by. So you get different levels of respect for freedom of speech in different countries. And I think that is, and so that's kind of not in my remit. That's politician talk, that's not my business. They are diplomat talk, which I'm just learning. Well, in your 10 months. But it's not in my remit yet, so I'm not dealing with it. But we are, if it comes up at the EU level, we will deal with it there. But look, those two issues created the far right. What they call the far right. In America, we call them Republicans. But that's not really true. That's kind of a joke. But or maybe far right Republicans. But they created these populist parties. Those issues created the populist parties. If the center right, and the center right is now the EPP is addressing these issues, certainly addressing immigration. I don't know if they're addressing freedom of speech. If they don't address these issues, those parties are going to continue to grow in power, and it's going to seriously influence the political environment in Europe.
Thank you. Anybody else who wants to chip in? Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador, and thank you so much for being here. By the way, I am a member of the so-called far right, so or what they call the far right. What I'm really concerned with, it kind of touches on that too. You pretty much nailed it in your opening statements. The problems we're having, it's a totally ideologized ideology everywhere, with no common sense. It simply does not seem to apply anymore. What I'm truly concerned with is the utter erosion of democratic principles. You mentioned a few. Freedom of speech is no longer seems to have a value. We're censoring social media now for dissidents. And that actually does remind me of very dire times, Soviet communism, GDR, the eastern part of Germany. But we're seeing it being rolled out all over Europe at the time. And it does seem to literally aim for dissidents. So if anyone not agreeing with whatever Ursula von der Leyen is dreaming up with next, and what she just announced yesterday, she wants to implement a digital ID to simply access social media. So, and we will get to a point where the state knows everything about the citizen, rather than the citizen knowing everything about the state or the government. So, if that continues, and at the time it does seem to look that way, unless the so-called far right will drastically grow numbers. Does the U.S. The Trump administration, do they have? Are they sensitive towards that? Are they seeing that coming? And do they have a contingency plan in case that Europe, and I really have to admit, I see us going this way, that we will eventually slip into a full-blown totalitarian regime? Is there a contingency plan? I hope to God there is.
So I want to make clear, first of all, before I read it as a headline in Politico tomorrow, my comment that the far right we call Republic was a joke. I said that right. Okay, all right. There is an undersecretary for public diplomacy at the State Department, Sarah Rogers, who's going around to all of the European countries and encouraging them to be more respectful of freedom of speech. I don't know that the United States has a contingency plan for European values collapsing. I will tell you that it looks to me like National Rally is probably going to do pretty well in France. I don't think they're necessarily friends of the United States, but I think they are friends of free speech. Fidesz, of course, in Germany. Fidesz in Hungary. AfD in Germany, again, not necessarily friends of the United States on every issue, but friends on freedom of speech. And so, so we do have the populist parties rising here. And then Nigel Farage and his party in the UK, which I think is in worse shape than any of the mainland European countries as far as civilizational decline. There does seem to be a backlash from the populists, from all of you, on these civilizational issues. I will tell you, it wasn't so long ago in the United States that Joe Biden's administration was telling, Twitter, it was then Twitter, now it's X, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, to censor the speech of Republicans, people on the right. You may recall President Trump had his account on Twitter canceled. So this isn't something that's irreparable, and it isn't something that we haven't experienced in the United States. It's something that people rejected in the United States. We have I always thought it was kind of a bad system that we have elections every 2 years for a House of Representatives, every 6 years for senators, although they spread it so it's a third, and a third. So even the Senate's every 2 years, President every 4 years. That seems like awfully soon. If you're a member of the Congress, our parliament back in the United States, you win your election, you're running for, you're fundraising a week later for the next election. It's only 2 years away. So, but it turns out that's actually pretty good. It turns out that our democratic process moves quickly, and it moves with public sentiment. And so I think we've seen some rapid changes since 2024, since President Trump was elected. And I think that kind of thing can happen in Europe. It's just going to take longer. This next year will be, we'll see a lot of it. You've got an election in Spain, and it looks like EPP will, if it were held today, EPP would win. That's a positive change. You've got, as I say, National Rally rising in France. That's next April. I know there are regional elections coming up in Germany, and I'm not following where those regions are, but I think AfD continues to be more powerful. So the parties that are supporting economic growth, in other words, deregulation, not socialism, but capitalism, that are supporting stricter immigration, and that are supporting stronger protections of freedom of speech seem to be on the rise. And I would hope that's something parties on the left and parties on the center right realize.
All right.